Did One Piece chapter 1116 just suggest that Joyboy himself destroyed over 100 islands and flooded the entire world in the process? And what would that actually mean? Was Joyboy a bad guy from the start, or was he a good guy who gained too much power and eventually lost control here? Or are things just not as they seem? And all this juicy speculation comes from the incredible new information that we got that basically confirms to us a few really major theories about the ancient weapons. First off, Dr. Vegapunk tells us that a piece of his own created Mother Flame energy source was stolen and then used to fuel an ancient weapon. And based on previous conversations from the Five Elders, we do know that the Mother Flame was required to fire Imu's island-killing weapon, so there we have it. Finally, confirmation that Imu's crazy lasers are indeed an ancient weapon. We all thought it, but it's now confirmed. And unless Oda is hiding even more ancient weapons out there, that there is actually more than 3, that essentially would mean that this weapon has to be Uranus. And while that is what we basically all collectively thought in the past, now that we know for sure, basically, we can really dive headfirst into some truly major theorizing about how the ancient weapons were actually used in the past and how the government got their hands on one in the first place. Because on top of all this, we also learned that Joyboy intended to pass down all 3 of the ancient weapons to future generations as well, and while at first glance this may not seem like that big of a reveal, it actually is a huge deal. In fact, this finally clarifies a little bit of the timeline that the Void Century had in terms of who had the ancient weapons to begin with, who used them, and who actually flooded the world. Which, as I mentioned at the start, is basically like 80% confirmed to be Joyboy at this point, so let's break down exactly why I say this. And let's actually fit some big pieces together here first. Based on the recent few chapters, we now know that Joyboy was the so-called first pirate born in the ancient kingdom, and most likely he also used the awakened Nika fruit just like Luffy, as we saw in a panel here. On top of that, it's also reasonable to suspect that by becoming the first pirate and exploring the world, Joyboy was very likely the one who also discovered and united the ancient weapons in the first place. There is a chance that it was also part of the ancient kingdom, but this seems more plausible to me. We do know this because Joyboy was allied with 2 of the nations that protect the ancient weapons on very different positions on the globe, those being the Fishmen and the land of Wano, and it's very likely he was friends with the nation that protected Uranus as well. And of course, don't worry, we will discuss who I think this nation was in just a few minutes, because that's gonna be important about how Imu got their hands on it. But with all of this information, we can be reasonably certain, I think, that Joyboy actually possessed and used the ancient weapons during the Void Century. But what's maybe even crazier here, though, is that it now seems pretty much confirmed as well that Joyboy had them the entire time throughout the entire Void Century War, because he intended to pass them down to future generations, and I mean, that kind of implies he was already losing and knew that they would have to be used in the future. And really, this should have been obvious even before this chapter in retrospect, which is always easier, I guess, to say. I mean, we do know that Pluton was being kept inside the walls of Wano, and Poseidon was kept secret as the mermaid princess, so clearly they didn't fall into the wrong hands at the end of the Void Century because they're living with allied nations. And as even more evidence of this, we know that the locations of the ancient weapons were all written down on the poneglyphs, and the poneglyphs, I think, is pretty reasonable to assume were only created at the end of the Void Century, once Joyboy essentially knew he was going to lose to the allied 20 kingdoms, because that's what the poneglyphs are. They detail the way to the One Piece and the entire story of the Void Century and Joyboy. So I think the logic here, at least to me, seems pretty sound here. But what's really messed up, though, is that in chapter 1115, Vegapunk said that the Great Flood was caused by the ancient weapons to begin with. And so then it has to be Joyboy who used the weapons that then caused the Great Flood, right? Which, I mean, that's a bit of a difficult statement to wrap my brain around. Even though in our last chapter review we did speculate that Joyboy might not actually be the perfect hero that we always assumed that he was. This is essentially confirmation that it was Joyboy, at least I'm gonna say 80% confirmation that it was Joyboy who caused unimaginable destruction and death across the entire world by raising the sea levels by 200 meters. So was Joyboy evil all along? I mean, it's certainly possible, but it isn't just as obvious as things might seem, and they never are in One Piece, of course. For now, let's consider that if Joyboy flooded the world, then it does make the 20 Kings of the Void Century basically the heroes who came together to stop the world from being destroyed. And while that is definitely possible, and something I'm sure the government would love people to believe, we also have to remember that Vegapunk said that he didn't know who actually was in the right and the wrong here during the Great War of the Void Century, so it probably isn't as clearly cut out that Joyboy was the bad guy and the 20 Kings were the good guys, and clearly the government is doing not a very good job right now of portraying themselves in a good light, so it was probably more like there was good and bad on both sides, which is obviously morally gray, my absolute favorite type of flavoring to any anime. So let's try and figure out what Joyboy's plan was from the very beginning here, because we have to remember that the world back in those days was technologically way beyond anything that exists in One Piece today. Much more so than the current world. But if we actually look at the technology that is present right now in the One Piece world, we can see that sometimes technology is actually used for good, as Vegapunk intends, but oftentimes it is also twisted into doing great evil, not directly on purpose, but maybe by the person who uses it, or it just falling into the wrong hands. If you want an example, just look at the deadly gas weapon that Caesar Clown developed, or the mass cloning soldiers that Sanji's family used to wipe out entire islands in the North Blue. So I can absolutely imagine that even more advanced technology could lead to even more war and devastation if used by the wrong people, and of course there is like a whole message there, I think, hidden somewhere by Oda about our actual world as well. And I mean, just imagine an army of these ancient robots laying waste to entire continents. It could be like the One Piece version of the rumbling, basically, which is a pretty scary thought there. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly what happened, of course, but I'm just trying to get you to understand kind of that just because this ancient kingdom was technologically advanced doesn't mean that the world was a utopia like Vegapunk imagines. Again, I think there's a lot of criticism hidden there by Oda about our current world and everything that's going on, but I think that's for a whole other video, and I'm very curious what the final message of One Piece will actually be. But now I say all of this to try to make more sense of why Joyboy might have used the ancient weapons which caused then the world to flood. And before I get into trouble, please understand that I don't approve of what I'm about to say, nor do I think that Oda necessarily believes this either, but the shocking truth just might be that Joyboy flooded the world because he thought that the ancient kingdom was incredibly evil, or maybe that their advanced technology was going to destroy the world, kind of turning on his home country. And I mean, it's not like a great cleansing flood is really that new of an idea either. I mean, think about the flood from the Christian Bible and basically any religious or cultural tradition from about the world. In the book of Genesis, for example, God basically flooded the world to wipe out all of human evil. Then, after the flood, the waters lowered and civilization began again from scratch with God's chosen people. And since we know that Oda often takes inspiration from many religions and stories, it could be possible that Joyboy's plan was similar. Basically, flood the world, drown anything evil, and allow the civilization to then recover from whatever evil he thought was so horrible, and then unflood the world at some point so that people could start over again. Also, quick side note, I have mentioned this before, but there's actually a lot of really interesting material out there that a big flood might actually have happened 12,000 years ago during the Young Dryas theory on Earth, and that there might have been civilizations before that great flood that were much more advanced than we thought. That's a whole rabbit hole, and there's a lot of weirdly interesting connections to One Piece here, but also that for another video. Bringing this back to Joyboy, it is a harsh possibility for a character that we all thought was a hero, but it does also kind of make sense if you look at the One Piece treasure and the ancient weapons as well. Because look at it this way. Joyboy sees evil all over the world, traveling as the first pirate, decides to flood it, and then hides away the ancient weapons until the proper time in the future. Then he leaves behind the poneglyphs and the One Piece so that when the right person arrives at the right time, they can then use what Joyboy left behind to unflood the world. That does somehow make sense with what we've seen in the story so far, right? I'm not just totally crazy seeing this connection here, am I? Now, of course, I could be completely wrong about all of this. Maybe Joyboy was just really a straightforward good guy like Luffy who had only good and pure intentions, but his power just got way too big for him to control. I mean, ancient weapons. Either way, it seems clear now that Joyboy did have a plan for the ancient weapons for some time in the future when the next person who could awaken the kneecap fruit returns as well. Which, logically, I guess, would of course involve hiding them away, and with the confirmation that Imu's weapon now is most likely Uranus, I think we have enough here to really speculate about this third, very mysterious ancient weapon, because as we've mentioned, we've now known the locations of Pluton and Poseidon for quite a while. Both were capped with allies of Joyboy, with the Fishman and the Samurai in Wano. And so you might be asking now, how exactly does this give us any more evidence about Uranus? And to answer that, I want to bring up some old theories about the ancient weapons that are now a couple of years old that I also talked about a bunch back in the days. We now basically know that the theory regarding the ancient weapons representing the sea, the land, and the sky seems to be pretty much confirmed. Poseidon is the ancient weapon under the sea, Pluton, most likely some sort of ship, is kept inside of an island, and Uranus is clearly a sky weapon above the sea. So if we use this information as a clue, that does leave us only a few real possibilities for where Joyboy tried to hide Uranus. First off, the sky islands make a lot of sense right off the gate, as it's obviously high up in the sky. Fishman Island, then the sea level, then all the way up to the clouds, right? I feel like that's pretty straightforward. Or I guess same for the moon, which is up even higher than just the sky islands. But there's actually one other location that is more suitable where I think that Joyboy would probably have hidden the sky ancient weapon, if I were him at least. Because to me, all the evidence now points to the top of the red line. Now, you might be wondering why it would be up there and who would have been guarding it. Plus, if that was true, then how in the world did it end up in Imu's hands to begin with? And to answer all of those questions, let me bring you a little bit back in time to the old chapter 1023. In this chapter, during the Wano arc still, we first learned from Marco that the Emperor Whitebeard once explained that the winged race of Lunarians once lived atop the red line in the so-called Kingdom of Gods. And of course, we still know very little to nothing about this mysterious other ancient civilization of Lunarians, but we do know that at one time they were finally wiped out and that they were hunted down by the world nobles even to this day. And so by piecing all of this together, it does make a lot of sense to me that Joyboy did hide Uranus with the Lunarians. And then when the celestial dragons ended up wiping them out, they ended up taking over the top of the red line, established Merijoa there, and found Uranus, which not only explains how Imu now has the weapon to this very day, but also why Merijoa is whispered to have a national treasure too, which doesn't explain why the Lunarians are still hunted to this day, but we will answer that question also in just a few moments. But before we can jump off to that topic, which is also really mind-breaking, let's first talk about some other really incredible details of this chapter. And let me leave you with one more bit of solid evidence for this theory as well. Because many moons ago, I actually talked in a video about some theories about the actual nature of the ancient weapons, and in that video I explained that the ancient weapons were possibly made up of 3 parts each. First, a person who inherited the ability to command the weapon. Secondly, a legendary gigantic creature to move the weapon. And third, some type of machine or vessel of some sort. And this actually works quite nicely for the 2 ancient weapons that we already know of. For Poseidon, the person is the mermaid princess Shirahoshi, the creatures are the massive sea kings, and the vessel is the giant ship Noah. Then, for Pluton, we have a surprisingly similar structure. We have Momonosuke, who inherited the ability to command the giant elephant Zunisha. So that gives us the person and the creature, which means that Pluton could be a ship or an actual weapon that would then be carried or pulled by Zunisha. In fact, this would explain why Zunisha even came to Wano in the first place to open its borders, freeing Pluton because it planned to complete its part of the ancient weapon. And of course, that just now leaves us with Uranus, and I'm actually going to leave you with a super spicy theory here right now, because if we follow that exact same three-part type pattern for Uranus, that means that we need a person, a creature, and a machine. Well, I think clearly the person controlling it right now seems to be Imu. The machine part is the weapon that fires the lasers down to destroy the islands, but that just leaves us with the creature. And this is going to be a little bit of a wild speculation here, I'm gonna admit, but remember that one of the world government's top science projects is to recreate dragons? Like, we're told a lot of times throughout the story that the government really wants to bring dragons back, like we saw on Punk Hazard. So what if there used to be dragons on top of the red line, and a dragon was also used to carry or pull Uranus? And there are actually some further connections between dragons and the Lunarians as well, because the one Lunarian that we knew, King, used a lot of dragon-based attacks. On top of that, we've seen that Kaido, who King thought might be Joyboy, could create many clouds in his dragon form, so if it was a dragon pulling Uranus, then that would explain the giant mass of clouds that forms before it was fired. But that's not even the most interesting part of all of this, because as we've seen from Momo and Shirahoshi, the ability to command the ancient weapons is inherited through their lineage. So it's not just like anyone can just randomly command these massive beings. That means if we're speculating that Uranus was hidden with the Lunarians, then the person commanding it should also have been a Lunarian. Do you see what I'm trying to tell you here? That's right. It's entirely possible, I think, that Imu is a Lunarian, and maybe they just wanted the rest of their own race wiped out so that no one else would know his secret or could use the weapon against him. And of course, if we look at that idea, that once again could lead to a whole other theory discussion about how Imu might have once been Joyboy's friend and then later on betrayed him. But for now, let's head back to some of the other truly stunning reveals from this chapter, like how we learned that the Den Den Mushi broadcasting Vegapunk's message is most likely hidden inside the Iron Giant robot. And wow, I could not be more excited for this finally happening, because even though this means that the broadcast will likely end soon, as we all expected, I cannot wait, and I can't stress this enough, cannot wait to see the Iron Giant in action against the Gorosei, because surely they will come to destroy the ancient robot somehow, but who knows? Maybe the Iron Giant will show us the secret to actually damaging the seemingly invincible Gorosei, which honestly, let's be real please, would be a perfect way to actually end this arc. And speaking of more ancient lore though, one thing that Vegapunk has not mentioned at all is the road poneglyph that we all kind of just have assumed to be on Elbaf, which is honestly a little bit strange. Up to this point, we've assumed that Vegapunk should have had access to all of the poneglyphs existent on Elbaf, plus the research on top from all the scholars of Ohara. And so that now leaves us with a few options. One, the road poneglyph is actually on Elbaf, but is kept secret from everyone, including Vegapunk, maybe with Prince Loki or something. However, the second option is that the road poneglyph is not on Elbaf at all, and there is some other evidence to actually support that idea. Because do you remember this from the Road to Laugh-Tale promotions that we got back during the end of Wano when Oda took a break? I mean, here we see Oda revealing 3 possible locations for the last road poneglyph. And those 3 were Elbaf, Pirate Island, which is currently ruled by Blackbeard, and then a super completely random one named Vida. Huh? What? Now, this small island of Vida has actually only been mentioned once in the manga, but Oda has brought it up in SBS 234, where it was actually revealed that the government of Vida was overthrown in a revolution led by the Revolutionary Army. Which, you know, just seems a little bit odd and random to include this island on this super important list of islands in this SBS, but who knows, maybe Vida will be a lot more important than we all ever thought. Plus, another reason that the road poneglyph might not be on Elbaf is that supposedly the man marked by flames is connected to that last road poneglyph, as Kit mentioned, and most people just assumed this was gonna be Saul, who might have scars from being frozen, or the fire on Ohara. But when we saw the giant Saul a few chapters ago only, it didn't really appear that he had been like crazily burned or crazily scarred by this on his arms arms and legs, so maybe the last road poneglyph isn't in Elbaf after all. But maybe the most controversial reveal in this entire chapter centers around the Fleet Admiral Akainu, because when he mentions that Vegapunk is going to explain everything, that got a ton of people thinking that he knows the true history of the Void Century. Even Sengoku, a former fleet admiral, is seen stress eating right during this, so maybe becoming the fleet admiral means you get to know more about the Void Century than we ever imagined. However, as someone who reads the Japanese original, I'm not really on board with that idea. Like, the sentence that Akainu says in the original is a little bit ambiguous, but it sounds more like he's saying here, you better tell us everything now, Vegapunk, and not really, you better not tell us everything. Like, it sounds more like he wants Vegapunk to spill the beans on everything, and more like he's really shocked by what he's hearing, kind of that he probably already suspected some of this stuff going on. Also, I do think that if Akainu knew that they were being ruled by a corrupt tyrant, that he would not just like sit back and follow orders, especially with his crazy sense of justice. But now, if that was one of the most controversial topics, then this next one is certainly the one that's going to affect the world the most, because in this panel here that most of you maybe didn't even think twice about, we see King Elisabello learning that Lulusia has been wiped out, and this is actually super important because to this point the world likely didn't know that an entire island nation had been destroyed in the first place. And so now that those news are leaking out to the world and other nations are going to confirm the fact, this could lead to more and more nations leaving the world government and joining up with the revolutionary army. I guess on the other hand, it isn't 100% clear that this was actually the world government who destroyed Lulusia. I mean, Vegapunk even mentions that he doesn't know who used the ancient weapon, but surely this news will come out eventually, possibly from the revolutionary army, because I mean, Sabo has seen some stuff, to say the least. However, even though there are still many secrets about the Void Century and the ancient weapons, there are two men in this chapter who actually know every single thing that you would want to know about the story. And of course, those are two of the former Raja pirates, Crocus, who waits at the start of the Grand Line, and Rayleigh, who waits at the halfway point of the Grand Line. And man, these two are acting giga weird in this chapter. I mean, Crocus looks just incredibly serious, like, oh boy, like even mad almost. And Rayleigh is just getting absolutely hammered to the point that even Shaki, who doesn't seem like the type, tells him that he should please stop drinking. And I want to focus on Rayleigh here especially because ever since the famous He Laughed panel where we see Roger, we've kind of always assumed that Joyboy left behind a funny tale or story, something really positive, but seeing Rayleigh getting himself this drunk to almost the point of passing out kind of tells me that he's not wanting to really remember what he actually learned that day on Laughed Tale. Either that or he just feels incredibly guilty about something. Could be that when Vegapunk questions why the Raja pirates didn't do or say anything, Rayleigh is feeling a real incredible sense of guilt that they actually didn't do more to try and help or save the world. And so, yeah, I personally wouldn't be surprised if that funny story that Joyboy left behind isn't more of a tragic comedy than a tale full of laughter. Of course, Rayleigh wants the younger generation to figure this out all on their own for some reason, and I do think it's very likely that most of the Straights haven't even been hearing most of what Vegapunk has been saying while they were fighting. I mean, yeah, it does seem like this message is also being broadcasted across the entirety of Egghead Island, but in case you haven't been noticing, Luffy and the crew have been seen a little bit busy fighting these unkillable, invulnerable Gorosei. Really, the only hint that we get that any one of the crew is actually listening is this panel here where Robin appears to be thinking about something that Vegapunk has just said. And while that panel of Rayleigh hit me so hard, there was actually one more shocking image from this chapter as well. And that was this panel of Imu looking at the portrait of what appears to be Nefertari di Lili. Now, let me remind you that back when Lili was first introduced, we speculated there might be some sort of weird love triangle between Lili, Imu, and Joyboy, where basically Imu loves Lili, but Lili loved Joyboy. I don't know, maybe Joyboy loved Imu, that'd be funny, but like something like that. And this scene kind of only adds a little bit more evidence to that very idea. I mean, why else would you have a photo of a person from 900 years ago on your wall? Also gives me strong Professor Snape vibes for some reason. After all these years, you still love Lily? Oh, the name is actually Lily. That's so good. I didn't even realize that. That makes even more sense. And then Imu is just like, always. And while that's a pretty fun one to think about, it isn't the only idea floating around about Imu and Lily, because some people have also speculated that Lily is actually the evil one here. That's right, you heard me. Vivi's ancestor might have been evil, and as evidence for that, they actually point to the figure from the Jewish Bible named Lilith. Lilith, who was actually supposed to be Adam's first wife before she was cast out of the Garden of Eden, so it could be that Lily was actually evil and could have plotted the destruction of the world all along. And I mean, the primordial demon Lilith, and the devil fruits, like, I mean, there is some stuff going on there. We have the Adam tree, the Eve tree, the tree of knowledge. There is all that Bible stuff going on. It would even make sense, which you might say is a bit of a stretch. And I mean, I guess I'll admit that, but it's still a very interesting idea to pursue. One thing is for sure though, that painting of Lily has got to be super old, like mega old. In fact, it might be one of the oldest objects we've actually seen in the entire story of One Piece, but it's likely not quite as old as, say, the frozen Straw Hat in Marijoa, and not nearly as old as, say, the legendary Tree of Knowledge on Ohara. And if you want to see the oldest things in One Piece from youngest to oldest, it gets really crazy old, then you can watch that video right here. Thanks so much for watching. I really always appreciate it and reading everyone's ideas and comments below, and I hope I will see you also in this next one. I promise it's really interesting. You probably don't know a lot of ages in the One Piece world.